high school prepared me so much for church planting because of how often I got rejected.
What does trying to get close proximity look like in the burbs when a lot of people kind of seem to go there to get away from being proximate?
What are the needs of this community? What are people struggling with? What are the facades that they have put up as well?
Welcome to Parish, a video podcast that celebrates, equips, and focuses on small churches and why they matter so much. We believe small churches are uniquely positioned to integrate in their communities and engage issues in ways only small churches can. I'm your host, Canaan Hurst, and this is episode 14, Church Planting and Hospitality. Today, I'm so excited to have Mark Grapengater, who is the pastor of The Table, which is a small church in South Denver.
Yep.
And I can truly say it's a beautiful community. I've been now at this point. And I think one of the most beautiful things is the rich liturgy. Like, you know, I think a lot of churches right now are like starting to write liturgical prayers and things, but there was a lot. And it was like...
There was a lot.
It was awesome. No. The framework that I think that it gave me, at least, to kind of have a voice to pray for anything from spiritual development to, you know, advocating for the poor and the oppressed. I mean, just awesome stuff. So
thank you.
Really beautiful, rich community that meets in your house.
Yeah.
Let's get going. Just talking about a little bit of your journey and how you got started and how'd you end up in a small church?
How I got started in ministry overall.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. So there was just in my personal story is we moved from Oklahoma City to Tulsa between my 5th and 6th grade year. No small time in my life, developmentally and everything. And that was just an absolute unmooring of what I knew to be true in my soul and everything. And so we grew up in a Christian home, and so we found a church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that 90 miles though just was I gotta figure out what my life is about. Over the course, so my faith became my own. In that process, I really took some ownership of who I wanted to be and who I thought God wanted me to be as well. So got very involved in church, got very involved in youth group, and started doing some mission trips to Mexico and Costa Rica. And the first one I went to in Costa Rica, they had me share my testimony. And as I just said, I wasn't delivered from drugs or didn't have, all these debaucherous issues in my life. But it was more of Christ is with me and he's my friend. And that just completely reshaped, even as I explored that on that trip, reshaped who I understood God to be at that point. And then he used me as I shared my testimony. People came to faith, or their faith was renewed, and it was really powerful for me to be used in that way by God. And so I was like, well, I'm called to ministry. This is what I want to do. So when I went to college, I decided I'd be on radio. And did that first semester. That kind of didn't love it. It was fun, but it wasn't amazing. And did a few other things. Then came back to the church that I grew up in and said, I want to do an internship, youth internship. And so I spent a summer hanging out with high school students and middle school students and had a great time. Absolutely loved it. How does your faith work out in your life? What does your relationship with Jesus look like? How does this overflow into the fullness of who you are? And came back around and said, okay, I'm going to seminary. So graduated, went to Kansas State, went up to Chicago to go to seminary right away. And that was long. That was hard. That was still a lot of formational things happening to me. And I had to answer the question: am I called to missions and overseas mission work, or am I called to the pastorate? And so in the middle of seminary, as a part of my seminary studies, but I took a year and went to Costa Rica, led short-term mission teams, And as great and as fun as that was, almost immediately I knew that wasn't going to be like my lifelong calling to live overseas. And so it was 2005, 2006,
Okay.
like prime, like church plantings on the up and up, getting more prominence again. And to me, that combined both the pastoral side, my heart for people, as well as that heart of going out and getting outside the traditional established church and maintaining a status quo. That's just not who I am. So I ended up getting involved in a church plant in Chicago, Grace, Chicago. Amazing place. Bob Reed is still the pastor there. And they were a smaller church in Chicago for that city. So a couple hundred people. Younger, urban, creative community. And the thing that hooked me there was they were doing a wine tasting. And so they were like, this is our, at that point, it was probably the third or fourth time they had done it. And they said, if, don't let money hinder you. And I'm like, well, I'm a poor seminary student. So, and they're like, here you go, here's a ticket. And I went, I had a great time. I loved it. And that began to kind of starting to see like food and drink and hospitality enter into kind of an understanding, like converge with ministry. Yeah. So all these things were starting to kind of converge. Graduated seminary in 2008 and didn't have a job. Thought I might have gone to too. Yeah. Thought I was going to go to Kansas City and work with a guy there. That didn't work out. Was kind of looking at doing a revitalization of two churches in Chicago. Did that for like 6 months, but more on an intern level. And but I was the only one there, so I was like, an intern with no structure, with fresh out of seminary. I'm reading a lot and taking naps and not and because there was nobody doing anything, there was no one guiding me. And church revitalization is a whole nother level from church planting. It's a very different beast. So, did that, and then when those 6 months ended, it was kind of like, what am I going to do now? So ended up getting a job at a restaurant.
Okay.
And that was amazing. I shouldn't have been. It was a phenomenal restaurant. Should not have had a job there. Like, it was way beyond any of my skill set. But the guy needed some people, and I had gotten to know the chef over the course of that year. And so I just, like, every time I'm doing a dinner now, or at any time I'm cooking, like, my skills and my foundations go back to that, those 6 months or so that I worked there. And so that was very shaping of what it means to do hospitality at a very high level and pay attention to the details, really care for one another. And so continued to worship at Grace Chicago after my internship, kind of the revitalization stuff stopped, and eventually found my way to St. Louis. And because I wanted to start a church, I wanted to be a part of that movement. Worked for two guys at City Church, and we just began doing ministry, throwing some parties, really stepping up the hospitality game on Sunday mornings as well, doing like muffins and stuff. But again, small community. I think, like, we were about 80 people most of the time that I was there. We broke 100 a couple times, and we'd go back
Easter
down.
or something.
Yeah. Well, Easter would be like, 160, and we're like, oh, and then the next week would be,
oh my God,
I have a story. Back to 80. Yeah,
I have a story about that. When we first started the Sacred Grace, our first Sunday was like 100 people.
Oh yeah.
And it was all of our friends and like a couple people maybe we invited from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But our friends and family, 100 people. Second week was like 12 people.
Yeah.
And we were just, well,
we're just carrying the energy in the room this week.
It was just such, this is the reality.
Yeah. That's usually, and that's pretty typical with church plants. So So it would go up and down quite a bit, but usually probably 80 was about the average the whole time I was there. Ended up being in St. Louis for about 3.5 years. Met my wife there, Stacy. We got married in 2011, and I began looking for jobs. The short story. So I kept working in the restaurants there. Worked for another guy John Perkins, who went to Covenant Theological Seminary and decided he wanted to be in food and hospitality rather than ministry. But he runs his restaurant now that he has. He was doing pop-ups at the time I was there and some catering stuff. And so I did a lot of that with him. And he was the last guy that I worked with in St. Louis before moving to Atlanta. So he was very thoughtful in what he was doing and just wonderful. Looked at trying to go plant a church after my internship was done. And God just pretty firmly said, no, you're not ready. And that was devastating. That was really hard. My heart really ached at that point. Had been looking for jobs in a traditional church, and nothing was coming together. Ended up, after he said no to church planting, suddenly I started having going down the line in the interview process with some churches, and ended up finding a church in Decatur, Georgia, which is right next to Atlanta. And there were 500, 600 on a weekend when we were there. Shrunk down during the time I was there. I was an assistant pastor, so maybe I'm to blame. Who knows? But and we were there for about 4.5, nearly 5 years, and had a great ministry there. Really was able to dig in and go, okay, what are the connectional events that we did? So I was over community groups, men's ministry, and then, all the other things you ended up adding in. But it was about 10 years old when I got there, and had a very strong presence in Decatur. Most people knew who All Souls was. Decatur was a pretty liberal area. At one point, it had the highest per capita gay and lesbian population, and we were a pretty conservative church in the country. It had per capita, and we were a pretty conservative Presbyterian church. Okay. And but had a good ministry. We're going to roll with it and see what happens. So I was over community groups, got people trained up to be relational, to have people over, to go, okay, yeah, study scripture and have something that's guiding your conversation, but the relationships are the key part here. And there were some hard lessons to learn in that for me, but it really shaped and molded me into what we're doing now as well. We did men's ministry, a lot of it was around food, the bigger events and stuff that we did. We had a beer and cheese tasting every year. We did a pig roast every year. And so it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It came to the point where it was okay, it's time to transition to something else, and began to wonder about church planting again, and was invited to come to church planter assessment with the Aspen Grove Church Planting Network out here, actually, in Denver. The Radisson, right off of 225 next to the Cherry Creek Reservoir, I'll drive by it still. During the time there, Stacy and I had we were out back, and they were there's broken glass and cigarette butts, and our 1-year-old daughter's crawling around in the midst of it, and we're do you want to do this? I don't know. What's going on? It was a lot of inner turmoil, and it was a very intense 3 days for us. So we began to pray again. We were approved a church plant. We began to pray again about where to go and what we should do in that, what our vision would be. I looked at planting a church in Chicago before getting the job in Atlanta. I had looked at Seattle's just a dreamy, wonderful city. Every time I've been there, it's weird and eclectic.
And the food
scene's off the charts. Love going and eating in Seattle. Looked at Austin. Was invited by pastor down there to kind of explore church planting with them, and then had a lot of connections out here in Denver. and Denver just was the one that was like continually saying, yes, please come, please come, please come. So we moved out here in 2018 and began to just kind of enter into the city of Denver. And we figured out what that looked like for about a year. And because we didn't want to come in guns blazing, this is our vision, and just like, that's just not who we are. We wanted to build relationships. We wanted to do that slowly. We thought we had a couple different church partnerships, and when we came out here, we did not. So that was a different. That was a chance. We were coming out here on the premise that we were going to be partnered with in some of these churches, and that didn't take place, which was hard, but not horrible. So we ended up developing some. Greenwood Community Church has been a great partner for us, larger EPC church in South Denver suburbs area, and that took about 2 years to get to that point with that partnership with them. So in August of 19, we began throwing parties and just gathering people. We would throw a very large party every month and have our neighbors and friends over. And we threw a Christmas party that was just insane, and did a lot of the cooking, put a lot of food out. But then the insanity was we had like 80 people, and there were kids, and just the ages and stages of our kids at that point was they're like, it was a madhouse. I mean, it was like a frat party, and I'm just going like I'm on the edge of kicking everyone out, and my wife's over the edge, and so it was like, okay, this is what it is. Like, this is chaos, and
Because this is in your house.
this is in our house, yeah.
Yeah.
So we kind of took January off, and in February we did Fat Tuesday or Shrove Tuesday. So we did a big pancake party. And our son was in kindergarten at the time. We were pregnant with our third, and he was born March 12th, and COVID hit. And I was like, all right, Cinco de Mayo. We'll be back for Cinco de Mayo. And Cinco de Mayo came and went, and the whole summer came and went, and we weren't throwing big parties anymore. And that's like a part of who we are that makes my heart so happy to do that. And I was so angry in the summer. And I was praying to God, and I was going like, why is this? Like, I'm angry, I'm sad. What do I usually do to cheer myself up? Well, I throw a party. And I was like, and I can't even do that.
Yeah.
So it shifted our focus, which was good, to really following up with and digging deep into some relationships around, like in our neighborhood. So we had some really deep relationships come out of that, because we would have 2 families over at a time. Everybody's healthy. We're wearing our masks and all that sort of thing. Or we're just sitting outside, and the kids are running around and playing, and we're sitting there having good conversations with friends over good food and good drink. And some of our deepest relationships still are through that time, which was really awesome. So, ebb and flow over the course of the next year, or 2 years, I guess. And we end up, so Greenwood says, come and preach your vision sermon, which was 2 Samuel 13. Is that right? No, 2 Samuel 7, where David goes and finds Mephibosheth and brings him to eat at his table always. And that is the vision of the table, basically. So providing a place at the table of God's grace. That we're doing it very relationally. It's taking a lot longer than we ever dared hope. But we're a place where what we found is the people that are coming are the people who were about to not have a place at church anymore, to be done with it. They just kind of checked out of the community, or there were people who had never come before. And they came to we did a big Easter party this last year, and I called it Feaster, which on Instagram people thought was like F Easter. And I was like, I'm glad you think I'm so punk, but no, like not that punk. So he came, he was invited by his ex-wife, and he found community, and he's been faithful in there ever since. And I'm like, that's the person we're planning the church for, because he's in his mid-50s, and to his own accord, his life has been a wreck, and he's starting to see and experience grace in a community. And I'm going, okay, this is a very slow work, but I'm going, that's the work that we want to see. Those are the relationships that we want to build. So we did a launch team. Ultimately, people weren't as committed as I thought they were to that. So then we started, I found that out as we began to start weekly worship. We started monthly in fall of 21, and then we started weekly in March of 22, excuse me. And it took us a while to get our feet underneath us. But we put together, as you said, a liturgy that has lately been described to me as a 5-course meal. And I'm going, okay, so we're in the process of kind of remolding that, not to lose the substance, because we're not a 4 songs, announcements, and a sermon church. We want there to be substance to really people's hearts and habits being shaped by the liturgy, if you will, of who God is, and their affections being caught up in Him, rather than the cultural liturgies that we have. So yeah,
That's awesome.
that's the long story. So we're chilling at like 12 to 15, like 20 would be a high number for us right now. And I would love for us to be more than that. But we can fit about 50 people comfortably in our house. And once we get up to that point, we'll start looking for another place. So,
Yeah,
but
cool.
yeah, because we're in the suburbs, and that is a new experience for us. I should say, we're in a suburban part of Denver. We're still in the city of Denver, but it is suburban living for us. And Stacy lived in Tokyo. I lived in San Jose, like the capital of Costa Rica. Lived in Chicago, St. Louis, Atlanta. Like our addresses were like the cities, and we're still in Denver, but it is the lack of proximity that we have to people is really challenging.
Yeah, let's talk about proximity. What does trying to get close proximity look like in the burbs
Yeah.
when a lot of people kind of seem to go there to get away from being proximate?
Honestly, I think we're still trying to figure it out some. So our stuff was delayed getting here, like our furniture and things, and it was in storage, moving from Atlanta out here. And so it came like 2 weeks late, 10 days to 2 weeks. And so we were in a big empty house, and like my kids were not happy because they didn't have their toys. And we couldn't invite people over because we were sitting on camp chairs and eating off of paper plates, and didn't have cookware, like just your basic things to do stuff. And so we couldn't invite anybody over at first. We couldn't warm the house up with people. Maybe we could have, but we didn't. And then it was like mid-September when we finally got settled enough to be able to do that, and a cold snap hit, and everybody went inside, and it was just like shut it down. So, which was completely different. And like the creation myth of the suburb of like people drive into their garages, close the door, and go in, like that was our experience. So we'd been in more urban areas the rest of our whole life, and people were always hanging out and always outside and front and backyard, and even in the backyard in St. Louis, it was so close, like you could talk to your neighbor like 2 lots down, because they weren't that big. But here, like you have to be yelling. So what we ended up doing was we just invited people in, and invited people in, and invited people in, and invited people in, and continued to do that. And we were never invited into other people's houses. I think it was like 18 months, except for people that we knew already, like before we moved out here. So it's just a huge hurdle to get over. And part of it's people, as we're discovering now, it's like, man, kids sports, like that runs a family. Major idol there. And my son's playing baseball, and I love going to watch him play baseball. And I'm going, but I don't want to lose like our family dinners that we have, even though it drives me crazy sometimes.
Right.
Because we have a 8, 6, and 2-year-old. Uh, and the 2-year-old does whatever he wants. So, but it's going like they're just out. There's a lot going on. So to plan something has been hugely challenging. The other challenge that we're facing in starting a church is it's the creation of two things on this. Like, so it's creation of a new community, and the people that to start a church, you need some mature Christians to come along and do this thing with you. And over COVID, the only community, or probably the most readily available community for them, was their church. And so coming out of COVID, they don't want to move and start that all over again. Those relationships, just like with us, those relationships were able to go deep. They spent time with them. And whether that was, maybe for some people over Zoom, but like approximate, they were very proximate with one another. And then the other thing is Denver is just a hugely like radically individualistic society. I should say individual society. So we hold close to our family. This is our units. We function here. And so all the churches that I worked in before were belong before you believe. So we want you to feel welcome here. We want you to know that you're loved, that you're a part of this community, even before you believe the same things we do.
Right.
Huge. I function off of that. Like, I love that. But in Denver, we almost have to take a step even before that to go, we need to convince you of your need to belong to something, and then convince you of the gospel and how that's the place that's going to be your most secure place of belonging. So getting back to people like proximateness is, for us, and how we do it is we just invite people over again and again and again and invite them into everything that we ever do. So our non-Christian friends and neighbors, we invite them to Bible studies, and we also invite them over for family dinners.
Okay.
We invite them we throw a big party barbecue. We're inviting people over. They most often say no to all the faith-based things that we're doing, but not all of them. They don't say no to every single one, but they, but for the most part they do. But then I just follow up. Okay, you don't want to do that? Like, let's do something else then. So constantly inviting people over is the way we're doing it, just to get to have that time. And where I think the shift that we were having a hard time with pre-COVID was how to go from these very large gatherings to then going to having 1 or 2 families over. And so COVID made us just do that shift. And then when we're sitting around, huddled around a table that seats, 6 comfortably, but we have 8 or 10 people sitting around it, like we're just crammed together. So suddenly we're rubbing shoulders, and we know what's going on in people's lives, and the natural flow of conversation can take place, which is when that just hits, like it is. I just kind of almost want to like step back and just watch it play out, of relationships and connections happening between people.
Because it seems so rare in a place like this that happens. The people I know, especially who have come from places in the South, although it's not just the South,
Right.
have been super let down here, and other places that are more individual societies.
Yeah.
They say, like, I've invited these people, and they've even told me, great, that sounds great, and then
Yeah.
don't show up,
And then they don't come. Yeah.
and I'm assuming that people listening to this are dealing with that, and like that takes so much perseverance. The constant invitation, and in a place like Denver, there are 52 different hobbies you can have, and they're all an hour
Oh,
away
yeah.
in the mountains.
Yes.
And that's what people do.
Yeah. There's an Instagram feed. I think it's, I don't know, Colorado Living or something like that I follow. And they're like, what Colorado looks like. And it's this reel. And it's this, what living in Colorado looks like. And it's this reel of this couple like riding the train, going through these beautiful canyons, skiing, I don't know if they're fishing, but something on a river, like all this outdoor things, hiking, because everybody hikes here, right?
Right.
And that's what living in Colorado looks like. And I'm like, it's you too, which is great. I'm sure that's wonderful for you guys to be able to do that. But out in the wilderness by yourselves or, alone with people as well. But like, that's not what living in Colorado looks like. Like, that's like living in Colorado is like what your job is and the people you're most proximate to in the neighborhood, your neighbors on either side. Where are those relationships looking like? Where are your kids going to school? Like, is your school well funded? Is it, Denver and its history of busing and all of that is, as I've learned more about it, is a fascinating conversation. And just like, are you going to choice into, out of Denver public schools and go to Littleton or one of the better school districts? Are you going to go to a private school district? Or are you going to roll the dice and like send your kid to the DPS public middle school? And our philosophy is like middle school sucks no matter where you are. But like those are the decisions. We're not like planning out our hikes every weekend,
Right.
or planning out like I have to have a distraction, so I'm always thinking about where I'm going to fly fish. But that doesn't mean I get to go fly fish every week. And so we're going like, are our kids being taken care of? Are there too many people in the classroom? What are the needs of this community? What are people struggling with? What are the facades that they have put up as well? Because those are like breaking down. That's been, I think, like I said, the individualism, and then when you get into relationship with people, in our context, it's getting the facade broken down. Everybody has all their stuff together, and then crisis hits, and you get a call or a text from, your friend, one of your close, like not quite a congregant, but kind of person in your community, going like, my husband's having a nervous breakdown. I don't know what to do, and you're going like, oh, I'm so glad that you called me, but I had no idea this was going on. Now we're able to have a lot of conversation. Now I can know how the gospel applies to your life. Now it's just like, it just takes so long. It takes so long to be able to get to that. And we knew them, for a year or more, actually probably longer, almost 2 years, I think. And before we were able to see behind that suburban facade of everything's all right.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of time.
Right. I mean, coming out of COVID just made this problem exponentially worse, but
Yes.
this idea and what I've heard from a lot of people is how many folks call a church their church home and say, I'm a member or I'm a congregant or whatever they say. I go to that church.
Yes.
And don't ever show up.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's so much association without kind of
Without
dedication.
Without being known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like showing up is like well, okay, like I'll come back from skiing early.
Yeah.
Or like, or you better
Absolutely.
meet at night so that I can like come back when it's dark,
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that. And I think that's something that's happening in all sorts of churches. What I've heard from big churches is coming out of COVID is like, they've got people who have realized like I can stay in my pajamas and get everything that I am comfortable getting.
Yeah.
And then I don't even have to get in my car.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and when you have 3 kids and you're trying to get them out of the house one more day that week, and if you're super involved in sports, you're doing that every day of the week. So Sunday for a lot of people is the only day that's their family day. And that's how this is our family day. That's how we describe it. So our priorities today are church and family, like our nuclear family. So it is one of those like, what I've seen when we've had people that have been a part of our community, like closely in the inner ring of who we are at the table, and then they've left for whatever reason. Usually, it's because they're afraid of the proximity. They go. Well, I should say that's part of my read of that. They when they've said, what do you think is best? And I'm like, well, thank you for asking. But I've said, what I want for you is to be in a place where you can be known, be at a church where you can be known. I am of the opinion that that it is a lot harder to do that in a larger church than in a smaller church. You can still hide in a small church, and you can still very much be known in a large church, but it's just baked in. There's if on a high Sunday for us, there's 20 people in the room. There's only 20 people in the room. Like, you're gonna see and talk to everyone in there, and they're gonna see you as well. And some people have left because they go, I'm not sure I want to be that proximate with that person. I wasn't expecting them to stick around, and I was like, I'm super disappointed by that, because I think that's when we start to see the gospel being played out, and Christ really being formed in us, having to go, oh, I have to lay down my own preferences, my own desires, my own anonymity, and I have to show up. And I think that's what God wants out of us. Is to show up. I think that's hospitality. So hospitality is the core of who I am and who my wife is and who we are as we're starting the church, the table. And there's a reason it's called the table. Hospitality in the Greek is the word philoxenia. So there's two words: philia, which is a brotherly love, familial love, and xenia is stranger. Xenia can have it can mean host as well, which is another interesting conversation, that it can be stranger and host. So it plays both roles in that, right? That one particular word. So philoxenia, the familial love of a stranger. And what that does is it puts love as something that it puts grammatically, love happens before the stranger. So xenophobia is stranger fear.
Right.
And this is love stranger.
Oh, interesting.
So it has both a direction of love towards a stranger, but it also has a purpose to it, in that it is its purpose is, by loving the stranger, you are bringing them and making them a part of the family. So you love them with a love that makes them a part of the family. Henry Nouwen defines hospitality as creating a free space where a stranger can enter and become a friend. And it's not that we're the ones creating that change, but it's creating space where that can take place. And so that is just kind of, and most of the time that happens around a table. So we would say in worship, we do the Eucharist, Lord's Supper, every week, because this is a practice that it is God inviting us to his table to be friends with him. It's him creating a space for us. And then we can take that out into the rest of our lives as well and go, okay, how do I create a space? Well, the most natural, you eat 3 meals a day. Like, don't do that alone. As much as you possibly can. I had breakfast alone. And a friend of mine was eating lunch alone yesterday, and we'd share an office in a church. And I was like, Mike, I can't let you eat alone. He's a big Greek guy. He's like, are you sure you're not Greek? And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure, I should say. But no, you shouldn't eat alone. That's sad. It's sad for me when I do it. So it is. It's just a baked in thing that we can do, and it's curious to me. I think very poignant that when Jesus said, "What I want you to do to remember me," it wasn't like this theological treatise. It wasn't this overarching vision and plan to take over the world. It was, eat this meal together and remember my death and resurrection in it. And that, to me, is just one of the most powerful statements of who this God is that we worship, and then who we are as a community of God as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that consuming is sacred
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and should be practiced as much
Because
as
that's where
possible.
relationships happen.
Yeah.
Like they happen at a table. The reason like our our family dynamic is eating a meal together in such a way that like our culture, the culture of our family is being established. That just is what happens. We get to hear about the kids' days. They get to not pay attention to what my day was like. It's where we yell at each other, where we cry with each other, where we love each other. And our hope, both my wife and I, is like that our kids would leave our house. Not that they would leave our house, but when they leave our house, that they would know that we love them because we ate with them so much. We made that a priority in our lives.
And even if they don't notice it,
Right.
when they don't have it,
Yes, exactly. I noticed like in seminary, because it was the first time I lived by myself, and I ate a lot of meals by myself. But like halfway through the semester, I was getting sad and I was getting depressed, and I realized that I hadn't hugged someone in like 2 or 3 months, and I was just like, oh, like all I need is a weird way to describe it, but like to feel someone's body, their warmth next to me, because I wasn't getting that anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, okay, need to find a church community, need to really dig into some friendships here and all of that. And then I think in a couple of years, I didn't live by myself very long because I couldn't do it. Like that's my personality, how I'm built. But I can't remember who said this, but so the most intimate thing we can do with one another outside of the bedroom is to eat a meal. And that's how they understood meals to function in the ancient Near East. And I think though we would never, like, we don't explicitly say that anymore, I think that is actually something that plays out. Why we eat with certain people, why we don't. I think that's like kids' school lunchroom kind of a thing, right? Like you can't sit here, go sit at the nerds table, or why everybody splits up into their groups, because it's that proximity and who you're going to be known as by the people that you're spending time with.
There's a reason, like the incarnation was God coming physically, in a body that needed to eat and
Absolutely.
sleep and
Yes.
be, he could have shown up in spirit and just taught all of his teachings that way.
Yeah.
But all of that physicality was intentional, right?
Absolutely.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Let's on that talk about churches that are decreasing in number, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I know that you said with some families leaving, it's like this closeness is something that's too much. I haven't practiced it. I don't know how to practice it. And I think that's totally, at least maybe not for them, but for a lot of people, closeness is vulnerable, and it's undoing, and you've got to look someone in the eye, and you can't be as angry at someone when you look them in the eye.
No, you can't. Yeah.
You can't rehearse or practice the.
You can't like write the text message like 6 times before you send it. Like,
you're not actually going to have that conversation you've had with someone in your head
Yeah.
for the last
Totally.
2 weeks.
Yep.
And that's really hard.
Yeah.
So I'm curious too, like with that, kind of a 2-tiered question. You have been a part of and have handled decline in numbers in a really healthy way. So how do you do that? And also, how do you walk with people as like, do you think a lot of people stepping away is like, these people who are still here, I don't see eye to eye on like anything with them, or like how are you holding the tension of, like you said, the people who are leaving are like, I didn't know this person was going to stick around, and then I have to be close to this person. Is that causing some decline, do you think, or is it
how am I dealing with the decline, or how is the community dealing with it?
I would say both. It's a two-tiered.
Yeah. It's extremely depressing for me. Like I have not set out to just be a house church. And I think there's very good things that house churches do. I don't find that that's not exactly what I want to do. So that's not my philosophy of ministry. We want to be located in a parish and in a neighborhood, and serve and love that specific neighborhood. And people coming and going is, we are just having a couple who's been with us from the beginning. They've been praying. We prayed together with them every week, and they are going back to the church that they were a part of, and that was like extremely sad for me. What I'm going is, God, you're winnowing this down. So you've given us people to help us start, to help us move in the right direction. My coach and mentor, close personal friend of mine, his wife said when they were planting a church, when they had these people that came along that were very excited and got involved initially and then backed out, for her, she saw them as way signs, like you're on the right direction. So this isn't your exit. You keep going to your destination, but you're on the right path. So this is exciting to us, and in my opinion, the what I've been told as well, church plants fail because the pastor quits. That's the number one reason, and there can be a lot of reasons for that. But it's going okay. I am like extremely discouraged by all these people leaving, or a handful. When one family leaves, that guts us basically.
Yeah.
And so when one family leaves, that like I'm just like, okay, are we going to be able to go on? Are we going to be able to do this? And God, in His great mercy, always shows us either through like great generosity of the supporters that we have. Somebody gives just a ridiculous amount of money, and it's like, okay, we have another month. Somebody else shows up that is we're going, okay, again, that's who we're planting this for. Okay, so we're on the right path. And now we're kind of redoing some of the stuff that we did. So you got like the full 5-course meal in our liturgy, and we're going to condense it down to maybe 3 courses, maybe 4, depending on how the structure goes, but doing all those same elements, but combining them a little bit. So it always pushes and challenges me to think critically of what we're doing, who I am. Are we embodying fully in our worship gathering the relational aspects of who we are, the invitational aspects of who we are, and who we want to be? Are we being faithful to the call God has given us? Are we reaching the people that we want to be reaching? And God continually just says, yeah, you are. And that's all like super concise, but like that's like weeks of gut wrenching people talking me off a ledge, and searching for other job positions and just not being excited about those.
Totally. Which is so real. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really challenging, and we're faced like the conversations I'm having is with people, other pastors in ministry, is the stuff that was published in 2019 doesn't apply anymore. Like there might be a few principles. We're not throwing everything away, but like where we are now as a culture, we have just had such a huge shift in the last 2 years that is just more challenging than what it was. So I think Ed Stetzer, about the shrinking of the church, Ed Stetzer said, so if you think of a congregation of like the front third, the middle third, and the back third, what we saw in COVID was the back third just going, we don't need to be here. So we can watch online. There's other more exciting things to do. And then the middle third kind of moved to the back third, and that front third has gotten actually more involved in the life of the church. And so his theory was you take the front third, get them, utilize them. That's not equip them. That'd be a better word. Equip them to re-engage with what the new back third, and then they re-engage with the people that have left, and keep that relationship going and happening. I would love to see that work. I don't know. I think we have like 5 years that this needs to be borne out in before we fully see the full effects of what COVID has done to our churches.
Yeah.
I do think we are starting to see more small churches happen. And those are the ones that are going to be more effective in being more proximate to their neighborhoods, their neighbors, relationships with people that are around them, rather than the big churches. I don't think, we have monolithic buildings of churches here in Denver that, are in the, above 5,000. But that's a really small number, actually. And so I think those churches will continue to exist. What I think we'll just see more of is just more smaller neighborhood churches, going back to that as a more viable model, and a more prolific model than what we've seen in the kind of the megachurch movement that the 90s were
And
all
is
about.
that because of the relational closeness, the kind of proximity, even though it might kind of scare people at first?
I hope so. I mean, that's what I'm banking on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
yeah.
That, like, because that's baked in just by nature of being small, that
Yeah.
that might be the thing.
And I mean, it's the biggest challenge, though, too. Like, I mean, everybody has their challenges, right? But like a small church, because we're sitting across the table from one another, and we had a beef earlier in the week. Like, now we have to go up and take communion with one another, and like people, won't do that sometimes. And so it's going like, I got to apply like my understanding of who God is and his relationship with me with this other person, like immediately. So
a healthy way to manage that decline first is probably to acknowledge it and lament it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And then second, to keep asking.
Yeah.
Are we doing what Jesus asked us to do and told us to do?
Yes.
And if we are,
I don't know how to do it any other way.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like
exactly.
for me, it's the relational loss that is the hardest part. This couple has been super faithful. They prayed with us every week for almost 2 years, and it's been great. And them going, hey, this isn't the church for us. We're going to stay at the church that we were at, is challenging, because it's like, how do we stay engaged in this relationship now? We're going to have to be more creative, and that's just for our own hearts in that. And at the same time, we're going, how do we guard ourselves and know that like when you break up with your girlfriend, you're like, yeah, we're going to stay friends. Like, that's probably not going to take place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, I don't want to just move to a neighbor with them relationship. I want it to be more than that. But that's the struggle then that we are trying to figure out how that relational aspect is going to be maintained. So,
yeah, absolutely. In a place like Colorado, constant invitation. I mean, it just
constant.
That's what it takes.
What's that?
That's just what it takes.
That's what it takes. It is. I feel like high school prepared me so much for church planting because of how often I got rejected. Like you ask girls out like over and over and over again, and I should say I had very little social capital in high school, and it was like, well, you're just going to get rejected. Like, that's what it's going to be. You keep asking the same people, and you just keep asking more and more people. And my hope is that like our people that are at the table will begin to ask people as well, that they'll begin to take those risks also. We're not quite there yet. That's huge, again, huge frustration for me. Part of why we're kind of looking at what we're going to have a meeting and say, what do you guys need to be able to invite people? And what's going to help you facilitate that invitation? What are you willing to invite people to? So that's the invitation is a huge piece for us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you are a house church right now because you meet in a house.
Because and it's free.
Exactly. You don't have to pay
rent. We don't want to
rent.
have 12 people in an auditorium that seats like 200. So that would be weird.
Because some people like the Sacred Grace, we were born out of a another church, so there was a building.
Right.
Even though we, for a year and a half, filled up maybe a third on a good, yeah, it's just like you've got to work with what you got. And then there are churches who are intentionally in houses and want to stay that way. What beyond the like meals, which I know is like your thing, which is beautiful. What are other benefits, unique things about being a house church that people might see as hurdles or obstacles, but that you found are like actually good things? Because I know like being in a house and having kids there, I mean, there are more distractions than in an auditorium, or there's less program built into this.
Absolutely.
What does that look like?
So with our kids, I mean, they're some of the biggest challenge that we have, and mainly because they're mine, and my wife's doing the Sunday school, which she will readily admit is not her main area of passion or her gifting. And then my kids, we go down to my basement, and they think they're down there to play with their toys, and their mom is there. So discipline and composure, doesn't happen.
Right.
Discipline happens after the fact, but them maintaining themselves together, that's a huge challenge. And then the other challenge is, and we're trying to figure out how to do this. Most of the time, people that have come in have been through personal invitations, probably the majority from my wife and I, others from either my worship guy or other people that have been in the church. So there's some kind of relational connection already. As we begin to look out and go, okay, in the next phase, we're going to begin to start just an open invitation for people that, like, we have a sign, we'll put a sign in our yard on Fridays so people know that church is happening on Sunday. Which means, like, there may be somebody that no one knows walk in the door of our house that we don't know anything about them. All our stuff is there. Things that we love for all, very sentimental reasons, and things that we love just because we spent our time and money on those things. So, when something breaks in the house because we have people over, like, I have to take care of that. And so that's a challenge as well. There's been some beautiful things, and like we get to share openly with anyone who comes in as well, all the things that we have. It's like we're not at a church building where we're keeping only a finite amount of who we are there. We have all of our personhood in this house when people come in. So we're able to go, okay, we're sharing our whole lives with you, which I think is that's how I function. Like that's just an integral part of who we are and how we do things. So, but that's challenged when fifth graders throwing like the kids' cash register like across the room, and you're like, you're gonna hurt someone or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is a hard piece of plastic you're chucking right now, man. I need you to settle down. But like letting go of control and just trusting, and having to be real with our kids of like, hey, if a toy breaks when we have people over, we'll figure out how to make that up to you, whether that means replacing the toy or finding something else, or some of the toys need to break and be thrown away. It's ridiculous, but
especially the ones that make noise, huh?
Especially the ones that they need the batteries out for sure. So that's part of the challenge. And then it's my son also, like, we have the chairs in the garage. He's 8, and he's going and grabbing. He's helping set up and tear down, and so we get to do this as a family. And whatever God-given reason, he like loves to be able to help out on these things as well. So it's like that's also super beautiful. They love when people come over. They love when their friends specifically come over, but they know that we're gonna have people over every Sunday morning. So getting them to clean up, all like us keeping our house like more together. And then there's the times, and we're trying to like break from that a little bit, just outside of like worship and having our house picked up for that. But we're trying. It was we were doing a Friendsgiving, so like fall 19, November 19, and my daughter was maybe 3. She was just been potty trained, And I had been out. I was grabbing a beer with a friend and came back and sat down for dinner a little late, used the restroom, flushed the toilet, and was like, oh, that sounded weird. Nah, whatever. It'll work itself out. 30 minutes later, my daughter comes running around the corner. There's water. I'm like, what? There's water. And like, you get up from the table super quick. We've had water issues in every house that we've owned, which sucks.
Yeah, seriously.
So for 30 minutes, the toilet had been overflowing. So they came in, all full remediation, all new carpet in the basement because it flowed down through the floor, all new tons of new hardwood up front. There was asbestos because the house was built in 1972, so I had to do remediation on that. My office was ripped up. So you walked in and our house, and we had people coming over in 2 weeks for Thanksgiving meal. Like, thankfully, it didn't destroy our kitchen and everything, but they had to walk through what kind of looked like a hazmat, like ET home kind of a thing, walking in, and there was plastic everywhere and fans blowing to dry the thing out. And it was like, well, you're going to walk into our mess. Hopefully this will give us some permission to walk into your mess as well. I don't know if that's worked out that way, but that was kind of the thought behind it, and going like, okay, well, we're going to still have a really good meal and we're going to spend some good time together. And it was annoying, but it wasn't the end of the world with the damage.
I mean, I feel like any vulnerability you extend or are forced to extend, whether noticed or unnoticed, opens a door, at least a level of trust for other people.
I hope so.
Yeah. Even
Again,
if
that's all I know to do.
Even if you don't see it or no one vocalizes it or anything. Yeah. No, that's tough. I mean, and then integrating in your neighborhood, because you could say your city, but your city's gigantic.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah.
And you're a very specific part of it.
Yes.
How do you integrate with limited budget, limited volunteers? What do you do to seek to help alleviate problems that are in your neighborhood, and how do you engage those?
So we are a fairly affluent suburban island surrounded by apartments. I did a ride along with a police officer, and he's like, yeah, we never really go into your neighborhood. There's two neighborhoods there, but this Southmore section. And he's like, we go to all the apartments around. So on the ride along, we literally did a circle around our neighborhood and never drove through it. And so that was really eye-opening, because there is a ton of need right around us, very tangible needs right around us. So the thing that we have done, because what brings then people into our neighborhood that are diverse from us, is the elementary school. So our elementary school, our kids we walk there every day. So it is that blurred line between urban and suburban living in that manner. And it's the community is very involved, but not diversely involved. So one, we've started small. We've said, where can we plug in and try to love and just serve this particular school?
Yeah.
And that's been what we've done. As I've talked to the principal there, he has said that we're actually a much more diverse school than on paper. So on paper, it says we're 70% white and 30% other. The reality is it's more 65, 35. And then he said, actually, the reality. He goes, so that's one more step. But then when we look at the actual makeup, a lot of the kids that are saying they're white are actually Eastern European, first generation over here, either Russian or Czech or,
Interesting.
And so what we look like and how we actually are, that school and our neighborhood. Surprisingly, it is one of the more diverse neighborhoods in Denver, which is
not a very
not a
diverse
very
place.
high, like we're 74% white instead of
Yeah.
76% white, you know. So
Right.
so we've identified through the school some of the needs, acute needs that are there. Like there's families that are food insecure on the weekends, so we're helping to be able to gather food and be a place where people can bring food to be able, for us to be able to donate to the school in that manner as well. Mr. JP, the principal, was like, I just need some people having being extra eyes and ears out, like during pickup and drop off. So, you know, do you have people there? And what we've done, instead of, we're in the unique position where we have more community outside of our church community than inside of it. So as you were there, you know, we're announcing all these things that we can do. But then we are going to be leveraging the relationships that we have with people outside. Many of them are involved already, but just to go like, hey, as we've talked to Mr. JP, here are some other ways that we can serve the school. And it's just like, you know, take your kid for drop off and stick around for 20 extra minutes. Make sure, you know, nobody's throwing ice snowballs at, you know, another kid's face, kind of a thing. So, which has happened. So,
Simple things like bullying and
exactly. Yeah.
In a place like this, because you know, a lot of small churches are in relatively homogenous looking places.
Yes.
So many people don't understand how much socioeconomic diversity there is.
Huge.
I mean, when a lot of people say diversity, what they really mean is racial diversity, and they say, "Oh, we're not diverse or we're not a diverse."
Yeah.
But what we found, and what clearly you have, is like just talking to schools, you realize how many people rely on, you know, free and reduced lunch and lunches throughout the summer.
Sophomore has a breakfast program, so anybody can go in and just say, I want breakfast that day. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Again, like the challenge of our community, like when you're in a more urban area, you really see into people's lives a whole lot more. In our more suburban context, again, that facade is just up. And so to really know what's going on behind people, because we create beautiful lives in these suburban environments, but like behind the doors is not always beautiful. It can be really challenging. It can be people are, you know, struggle with financially, struggle relationally, struggle with substances as well. But it's just way easier to hide it in that community. For the one family that it took, you know, a year to kind of break down some of the walls to be able to see behind that facade, like we're still in our relationships with our neighbors and non-Christians, we're not 100% seeing behind everything right now. So we're still waiting and patiently just trying to be there. One guy, the pastor at Greenwood, said, he's like, you know, I think 95% of being a pastor is waiting for that, you know, the kairos moment. I love when we get to just throw out biblical words like that, but like the moment where somebody goes, I need to talk to a pastor. I need to be proximate to someone who can connect me with God and the grace and mercy that's offered in Jesus Christ. Because in our context, people are just going to hang out until crisis hits. And we're really good at avoiding that in American culture. So, yeah, really good. And
Absolutely.
we can, like you said, we got 52 hobbies we can go to.
To forget.
And I'm a like Enneagram 7. I was trying not to mention the Enneagram, but
No.
like everything's a hobby for me because all of that will numb my pain. And it's like I can go deep into nerd out on coffee or fly fishing or bread or food or wine or beer or whatever it is. And it's like I love these things, but it's also helps me to be able to avoid the pain that's in my life. And because our American culture hasn't given us, and the church especially, has not taught us how to suffer well. And it's really, really hard.
That's the refrain I'm hearing. I'm talking to everyone. Yeah, let's lament. Like, let's figure out how to there's tension there. There's not a solution or a clear-cut answer.
No, and we have, as a church, we've cut the Psalter out of our worship, and so we don't hear this biblical category of lament happening. People don't have words for it; they don't have vocab because they haven't been exposed to it. And the Psalms are like the Psalm I'm praying right now is the one where the psalmist is like, "Hey God, wake up! Like, where are you? What are you doing?" And Scripture gives us those words to use, but we're entirely uncomfortable using those words in the American cultural liturgy that we've been given in the church. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
awesome.
Thank you.
Parish Podcast is a production of Vineworks Film Company. The executive producer is Nathan Hoag. This episode was produced, edited, and hosted by Canaan Hurst. Graphic design and set design by Erica Krysl. Find us on social media at Parish Podcast. Remember to subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you listen. This video podcast has been made possible by the generous support of the Sacred Grace, an incubator and accelerator that's cultivating leaders to take spiritual and social responsibility for their neighbors and neighborhoods. For more information, visit thesacredgrace.com.